Everybody, good afternoon. My name is Kaimi Pelekai. I'm a fire captain with the Honolulu Fire Department. I've been a fireman for 20 years. My father was a fireman for 37. So this career of service to our community is a part of who I am and a part of who a lot of people who serve in our first responder jobs are. So when this mandate came out 5 days ago, it created a lot of harm and hurt in our first responder community. To me, if you didn't put an experimental drug in your body that you don't have enough information about to make an informed decision, or you didn't get an approved religious or medical exemption, in the next 10 days, it literally said, you could be fired. I spent the last 20 years of my life and 37 years watching my dad do this job. And because I didn't want to put an experimental drug in my body, I got to give that all up. I got to choose between my personal freedom and I'm talking not just talking about me, but people who are first responders like me, who love our jobs, who love the people of Honolulu. And I know the people of Honolulu. I know, you know, it's not your guys' fault. You're not doing this to us. And you don't have to worry. We're going to show up every day. If they're going to fire us, they're going to fire us. And that's up to them. Well, we'll be there for you. We will be at work, don't worry. If we're not there, it's because of them.
Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is Shelby, founder of Unjected and doing some other great work in general in the truth movement and truth media. Joining me today to talk about what's going on in Maui, as she lives in Maui, and discussing some of the different theories floating around, really trying to, as we've been doing on the Last American Vagabond, trying to kind of, cut through all the BS, as so often happens when these large, terrible events happen, which is really heartbreaking, seeing as how there's far too many people taking advantage of such a terrible situation to push their own, perspectives and partisan ideas. So I wanted to invite her on today to discuss what she's seeing from the ground, what's been going on there, and some of the things that we can clearly prove are actually being misrepresented even by the corporate media. Surprise, surprise. So Shelby, how are you today? It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Aloha, Ryan. It's really nice to see you. I wish it was under happier pretenses, but thanks for having me on to help get some of this word out from our little island.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me. I'm sure there's a lot going on for you right now. I know that there's been some stress with your family and people at risk, and I can only imagine. So thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's just start with, where this all began for you. What was the first thing that stood out, and what did it seem was happening in the beginning, and then we'll kind of get into what you've been seeing as it's gone forward and what we think might have happened.
Yeah. Well, so to be honest, the day of, the 8th started actually way more precarious for me than just a fire. And it was actually the high winds that we had noticed that morning rolling into the island, which a lot of people are talking about, which was supposedly from the hurricane traveling south of us, Hurricane Dora, which was creating this, intense trade system. And I actually live up country in Makawao area. And so we tend to get a lot of wind, but, this was an abnormal amount. And it was around 4:30 that morning that was when my day started, where my chicken coop out in my yard had basically, I don't want to say the word exploded, but it had been thrown across my yard, maybe 15 feet. And mind you, this is a couple 100 pounds. So this was very abnormal. This is not an average little chicken coop. And so we thought, wow, this is quite intense winds. And my mom personally works in Lahaina. We've been here on Maui for over 10 years now. spent about 5 years living in Lahaina personally, as well as my mom. And so she still works over there. We had heard, just a little Coconut Wireless. There's a news channel called like Maui 24/7. There's Maui Now. They're just like little local channels to keep you informed. We saw that there was potentially a power outage. And I had just felt uneasy about it. And I said to her, I don't know if you should go out there. It just seems like something is wrong. There's probably going to be, probably going to be a fire. And this isn't unlikely. There is wildfires that do happen on West Maui because, of an abundance of brush, dry grass, occasional drought, not being maintained properly by the state. But it's never been quite this ferocious. I've been stuck in wildfires before in Lahaina. For hours before, but usually the wind carries them up to the mountainside and over because the trade winds come in from the ocean. And so for this day in particular, it was very strange because it was about 80-mile-an-hour winds coming from inland, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense when they said that the hurricane was south of us. So we should have been getting mostly trade winds coming from the ocean side and an abundance of surf, which wasn't really the case.
Quick question for you. So just on that point, because I know this will be relevant for people. So with the fires in general, would you say that they're reasonably common in these areas? Like just Maui, speaking of Maui, would you say that's pretty common? Not like this, but normal.
In the summertime, it is common, especially since what happened is they stopped the production of the cane, the sugar cane. And so they used to do controlled burns on the island just as of, 2017, or maybe it was the winter of 2016, they stopped doing that, where they would go through and clean up these fields of the cane, the sugar cane. And, it was really helpful for preventing, this issue, at least on my side of the island. On West Maui, there wasn't as much sugarcane production. But, there was fires that had happened before, never with this amount of destruction, but it was to the point where in 2018, the council had come together to talk about the last Lahaina fire, which was in 2018. And they had talked about all of the emergency management protocols that should have been introduced, and they talked about the failures during that 2018 fire. So there's lots of awareness that that we've been prepared for natural occurrences before, but just never something like this.
What I always have a real general malfeasance and government incompetence, like this just drives me crazy when you hear something like this where 2018, we weren't prepared. We need more funding and more whatever else they call for. And then, this happens again. And what's the saying? We weren't prepared. Which we'll get into, the alarm system didn't go off. And it's just, right. It's hard for me to not see that at the very least as just incompetence while taking money for the same reason. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
It feels deliberate, and I'm sure many of us feel the same way. And so, back to the day of. So
really quickly, actually, I had a comment about the corporate side of this. So when you're talking about the corporate, the sugarcane,
yes.
I know from, I've seen a lot of videos of a lot of the local population, yourself included, arguing that this is it's a travesty, that these corporations come in and they just reap all the benefits and they leave things ripe for this kind of a problem. When you said that they stopped, did they stop also kind of keeping up these areas that were problematic? Did that add to the problem?
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely. I figured as much.
So when they got rid of it was A and B sugar, and this was like very old from, the early Hawaiian plantation days. And it actually got bought out by a Canadian company, Maui Pono. And what they're doing is they're making part of these fields on Haleakala, they're growing not native fruits and vegetables, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They've actually done a lot of destruction to the hillside by, just completely tilling it, putting, plastic tarps in the ground. It's just, a problem in itself utterly. But yes, the fact that they stopped maintaining the cane is an issue.
I shared a similar story from Oahu. I lived there for a couple of years in the same point. I forget the actual name of the non-indigenous species that was brought, but ultimately the routing was too short, and now they have these landslides all the time, and it came from
Right.
something was brought in, same reason. And so
Yeah.
this is a very common problem.
Yeah.
Not to say that's all or even entirely, you know, why this happened, but that's something we should always consider. So go ahead, please go back to the day that you were going through.
And this was, and yeah, and a lot of that farming is on my side of the island, in which I mentioned I live on East Maui. So, you know, I'm only about 28 miles away from Lahaina. But it is, you know, it feels like another world because there's only one way in, one way out.
You could actually see it from your part of the island, right? I saw your
Yeah.
video where you could actually see the
Yeah.
part of the island Lahaina's on. Yeah.
I was on the south side when I took that video, but even from here, I get to see the West Maui Mountains, and so I feel the tragedy. But you know, the power was out the whole day in Lahaina. You know, that is being reported that, you know, it was as soon as my mom got into Lahaina, I was not able to contact her unless she had Wi-Fi. And so I remember I tried to reach out many times just to try to keep her informed of what I was hearing, because they weren't getting the same updates. And that is one of the things that, you know, the state said, was that they had sent a text alert, you know, even though they knew that the cell phone lines were down, the power was out. And, you know, so the day continued fairly normally. There's kind of some news coming out about accounts of a fire that had started at the top of Lahaina Luna Road at 7 a.m. that morning. And so, mind you, that's pretty early. And the fire department said that they had completely contained it. It was out. And then they left the scene. And, you know, this is what I'm hearing, which of course goes against all fire protocols, especially when you're considering that it's 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds. You wouldn't just leave a fire and just call it contained and then go about your way. And the reason for that is there was a few fires on our side of the island up in Haleakala, which was started by that wind that blew over my chicken coop, and which I've sent you a few videos of, which seems to be of precarious nature as well.
Is that pretty accurate right there from what you kind of generally, this is a corporate media outlet from the 8th. This was their satellite imagery, but is that seeming, accurate location?
That's correct. And so you'll see on East Maui right there, those red spots. I kind of live right in the middle, kind of the heart of Maui right there. And so that's kind of where they claimed they were attending to. And then as well as that South Side fire. And those were in the early day. And then, Lahaina, there was that 7 a.m. fire. They went about their way. I'm hearing that, you know, they had canceled school because the winds were so bad. And I do know that because, you know, even on our side, they had canceled school. And so a lot of children were home.
Is that common to cancel school because of winds? I mean, it's
a little unusual. I'm going to say it's a little unusual.
I mean, I've never lived on Maui, but in other locations, on Oahu in particular, you know, it's reasonably common to have some hurricane, you know, tsunami warnings. And, you know, at least my experience, I didn't remember schools being shut down that common. So was it the warning that severe, or why do you think they did that, in your opinion?
I think, you know, probably the power is going to be more of the reason, you know, the power's out, we can't do school. But you know, the high winds, we had a high wind advisory as well. And I remember seeing the notice that said, due to the high wind advisory and due to the power outages, you know, school is going to be out.
Well, so in that, on the point of the warning systems in general, so at this point, it was only people were under the impression that that the fire had been dealt with, right?
Correct.
So now looking back on what we know, was that the case? Was it still burning at this point, or how did the Lahaina part of the fire continue if they argued that they dealt with it?
Exactly. So, you know, people felt like it was under the impression that it was contained. You know, many people in Lahaina, like I had mentioned, we were used to knowing about fire and, you know, seeing smoke on a hillside and knowing, you know, we're probably going to be fine because it's going to travel up and over, and, you know, the fire department's going to be on it. And so as the day continued, 80 mile an hour winds, what happened was the power lines started becoming all compromised. They were literally, there's videos of them just teetering, just almost toppling over from Laniapoko all the way into far into Lahaina, Waiakuli area. Before you get into Kanapali. And so essentially power lines started falling from everywhere. And so, this is when, I would say the first responders started to address, dealing with the traffic on the roads, because it was becoming apparent that there was a traffic issue.
Mhm.
And so this was around, I want to say 2 or 3 o'clock when I was speaking to my mother. So mind you, I'm just, repeating her accounts of the day. And the wind had picked up so significantly, the power lines were falling everywhere. She decided at this time, right around 3:30, to leave Lahaina. I said, "You've got to get out of there."
Yeah.
And that's when she said that there was, she noticed that the smoke on the hillside was quite significant. It was definitely apparent that there was a large fire coming to Lahaina. But at the same time, there was kind of this feeling of not concern by first responders. And I don't want to say that in a mean way, but there was more concern of, she believed, of just directing traffic. And a lot of people are saying that they found it very odd that almost all of the exits in Lahaina were blocked. Every exit to get out of Lahaina had a power line, had a obstruction, had just a blockade by police officers. They were not like wanting people to leave Lahaina easily. And they were still allowing and directing traffic well into Lahaina at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And, we're seeing videos where the entire town is gone by 5 o'clock or 5:30. Police were herding people in, essentially.
At this point, what degree do you think it's possible that these people were under the impression that the fire had been dealt with because of the response, even though you could still see the smoke and the increasing of the smoke?
There's no way. I mean, you would really have to be, but at the same time, not everybody maybe has the same instinct. And so that is also where the alarm system comes into play.
Right,
Hawaii
exactly.
has the most robust alarm system in the whole entire country. And, it goes off once a month we test it once a month for the tsunami siren.
Right.
We know it works because we hear it as locals. Oh, it's the first of the month. It's kind of the joke, it's time to pay our rent. There's a tsunami siren. And, for the fact that hours, 2, 3, 4 hours went by with no siren. And, I heard Josh Green say, well, they were burnt. They weren't burnt for all 4 hours. And they're also designed to, run during natural disasters. They're not running on electricity. They're solar. I mean, it's quite frightening to think that the only warning that people actually had inside of their homes was when they finally heard screaming outside. And then by then it was too late. You can't escape that. And they're calling it the 17-minute fire, that it took the whole entire town in 17 minutes. And I mean, so my mom, she said that there was a kind of just a malaise feeling in the first responders. There was a lot of lack of action. She said that she finally was able to kind of disregard the barricade, and she was able to get out of Lahaina. Let's
focus on that really quickly, and the responders itself. But the interesting thing is, so your mom's experience, which shouldn't be disregarded, she dealt with this herself. She wasn't able to get past these roadblocks. Where were they directing her? Do you know? Like she
said in circles. She said they were directing. So in Lahaina, we have a bypass, and then we have the lower road, which is Front Street. And essentially, the way it had seemed was there was blockages in every single way. So you would just get directed into Circle, and you'd have to go into Front Street, and then it was gridlock on every single road. Lahaina has it's not even a city, it's a town. It's a very small town, very historic. You can barely at times fit two cars next to each other in some of these alleys. So the gridlock became immediate with with tourist vehicles and with local vehicles. And at that point, when you're in gridlock, you couldn't even go around if you wanted to. Then the only other option was this, the seawall.
So, I mean, obviously, the point is, in something like this, chaotic and certainly possible that they're just incompetent, but with everything else on top of it and all the other points, I mean, this as everyone's pointing out, it begins to feel very suspicious. Not to say that we know why or what they might be behind it all, but these things are, again, even back to this. So now we're at a point where, it seems that they're almost, even whether it's accidental or not, keeping people sort of in this location. We have the example of the actual sirens not going off, despite, and I was going to say, even like tsunamis, as much as they're a natural event, they're not actually that wildly uncommon, or the fact that the siren might go off just to be, so as you're not only the test, but the fact that, it's something that's common and suddenly doesn't work. I want to point this out from 2019. Get it together. False emergency sirens spark deja vu on. So even accidental false alarms, or the fact that the rocket coming, that was the fake rocket from North Korea.
Yeah.
Right. I mentioned this yesterday, and it's in one time, so just, it's very suspicious. I'm with you. So the thing about the responders though. So you mentioned before that there's some weirdness there, and this is all speculation, right? This is all personal opinion, but I do find it relevant. Like so I mentioned this, I played this in the beginning. I do think this is important. There's a reason I play this to start. Thank you from Takudi2D for sharing this with me. Here's the actual post from Hawaii News Now that we'll include in the show notes. Honolulu fire captain on why he's against the mandate. Now, this was 2021. Now, the point was that he was saying, if we're not there, this is why. Now, that's one part of it, in my opinion. So you're obviously at a loss. You have not enough people. That's happening all over the world. And then you guys have experience with some very weird encounters with these people that you argue that from people's experiences, your mother rather, that they were almost not aware of people asking for help. And so go ahead and let me know what that story was and what you was hearing.
That's correct. And, it's not something I like to just say lightly. Even in the past few days, I've gotten a lot of virality on a video that I made, and a lot of people reaching out to me with very just vitriol about what I've had to say. And I don't say any of this lightly, because I don't like any of this. This is a terrorist attack as far as I'm concerned, but we have to have dignity for what happened to these people. And that's why I'm bringing this attention, because she did say that first responders were, quite frankly, unrespondent. She said that she was trying to get one in particular police officer's attention, who was not aiding to anyone else. He was in his car, and she said she was waving frantically, trying to ask him questions, and he was almost in a hypnotic state. He was not making eye contact. He didn't notice anything that was going around him. Do people have a fight or flight response? Yes. Could people be in shock? Yes. But these are supposed to be our most trained individuals that are supposed to handle these situations. And multiple people are corroborating the story that they felt like there was not any responders anywhere besides, there was no fire department actively in the streets. The people in downtown Lahaina were claiming that when they tried to get into the fire hydrants, they were emptied. There was no water in the town. They ended up turning off the water to the town pretty early, which also is an interesting piece of this puzzle. And some people are like, oh, they didn't want citizens to stay and help fight the fire. But I don't know, that seems odd to me, because wouldn't you need water in the town for the fire department? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
That's
is that something that's been verified, or is that just secondhand?
Yes. No,
they turned off the water source?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense to me either.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, so yes, people corroborate that they felt that there was kind of a trance that was happening in Lahaina, and like we said, this is all speculation. I had a doctor friend that had sent me an article about nanotechnology and DARPA and the technology that's, with the ability to control behavior, modify behavior remotely. Is that why first responders were mandated to have vaccines? I think that is something that we should definitely just it should be mentioned.
Mhm.
And, as well in 2020 and 21, Lahaina, that's when they introduced all of the 5G towers. So Lahaina is now home to just many shining brand new towers that are over the whole city. And you'll see that they're not burned in the photos, which is also odd.
Oh, and we'll quickly on that in general, before people are quick to judge and jump to conclusions about what you want to call a conspiracy theory. All of what she just mentioned, in fact, we've gone over in regard to peer-reviewed science and patents on things that, whether that's what's going on or not, that's up for you to decide watching. But the idea of what we've covered on this show in regard to Charles Lieber, Robert Langer, they're literally working on the extension of what's in the technology used for these injections, the same technology applied for biosurveillance and for, in fact, actual, like we've talked about the ferritin nanoparticle injections, which The Guardian wrote about. They call them magneto injections, which are literally used to control and move the limbs of animals. I mean, this is real stuff. So you guys can feel free to dismiss that if you'd like, but the point is that these are things that we should consider. We should not be afraid to ask hard questions, even if people want to call it conspiracy theory. So it's very interesting. I mean, that's one of the reasons, so what he said in the beginning is that, pretty much all the people, and you could look at it both ways, whether it's something like that we're discussing, or just the fact that the people who chose to refuse the injections were people that have integrity, have that are willing to stand by their choice, even if they may be wrong. That's courage. Right. So you end up with people that are pliable, that are will going along with it, whether they know they're wrong or not. And, so either way, it's a problem, so now you're ending up with this situation where these people are almost non-responsive to the very people they're supposed to be protecting. And again, that's what I'm hearing too, not just from one account, but lots of different people trying to tell their stories who aren't really being heard anywhere else. It's very concerning,
Yeah.
So go ahead. Did you want to continue, or I have another point I could ask as well?
No, yeah, please go. Yeah.
Well, just to bring in the military side of this, right? Because you mentioned that as well, that there's military bases, I mean, literally everywhere throughout the Hawaiian Islands, which nobody there probably wants or likes, but ultimately right there, like very close. And that there's no indication that was deployed, any help, any warning, go ahead. Could you talk on that for me?
Yeah, I think this is where I start feeling just ultimately disgusted. One, the fire is a tragedy and its origins. We should need to get to the bottom of this. But what happened afterwards, the response to the fire, that's what makes me feel that it is deliberate, because of the absolute lack of just care for human life. And I love, the military base, is a huge point for me, because, we're only 100 miles from Oahu, which hosts a plethora of Navy ships, hospital ships, warships. They travel at very fast speeds. Why wasn't a ship deployed at 2:00 in the afternoon from Oahu to start pumping water from the ocean at Lahaina?
Right.
Why wasn't there a hospital ship there already when people were jumping in the ocean to escape flames? And now why are we 5 days later and there's still no one? No Navy. There's the Coast Guard that has been, we're hearing lots of accounts of them turning away boats with supplies. So I did see one press conference where they said there was about 8 Good Samaritan boats that helped with extracting people out of Lahaina at 2:30 in the morning. But mind you, people jumped in the water at 5:30, 4:30. It took that long to get 15 miles around the corner? No, they were stopping people in Ma'alaya Bay with their boats. They were stopping people in Kihei Harbor from taking their boats to go save people from drowning, because they said it was too dangerous. Well, and I'm just appalled by that. There's a lot of and I do see these comments where people say, oh, well, it's liability. We can't send people into a danger zone. And I'm sorry, if we stay worried about liability compared to human life, I'm just appalled.
Well, I mean, it's not an invalid point to argue that they might, it's all the bureaucracy where it comes from anyway. The idea that you're somehow liable for what somebody else may do without I don't get that in the first place. Like, if you stop them and then let them go, maybe. But the idea that these people, other than the boats as well, aren't there examples of individuals trying to bring water and different things, and FEMA and
Yes.
they're stopping them, right? I've heard this kind of ubiquitously. Now, again, you could argue that they're going, well, we don't want you to get hurt. But at the same time, there's also the other side of it, that they're not effectively helping people that need it. These people are there with things that FEMA isn't delivering in many cases, which we keep seeing, so it's is liability and bureaucracy more important than helping those people? Apparently, right? That's what they're telling us.
And it seems, and that's where it seems like there's a massive cover up happening because, especially now that we're so many days later, they can't use the excuse of the danger of being a danger zone and letting,
Right.
Friends and family in. We're in every natural disaster. One, there's press. There's not been press until as of one day ago.
That's another great
And
point. Where's all the coverage we're used to seeing and all the screen? Where are all the Hawaiian flags and all the people's
Where's
Twitter
the
accounts and
press?
all the things they usually see?
Is that they don't want to show the evidence of what happened, and they wanted to get people in there to clean up, basically, before we could see, and I find it just absolutely just terrible. But yeah, what's happening is what their boats with supplies, even to to this day, they have to go as close as they can get. They're not allowed to go on shore. You have to use like paddle boards or jet skis or small little boats to get the supplies to the shore, because they're not letting anyone go dock in Lahaina and get off and see what's going on. Obviously, so when my mom escaped Lahaina, this is when it became just more of, I hear the coconut wireless. I had her first town to camp, but now it's just kind of what I've been hearing. And so immediately that first day, the media said, oh, it was 6 people that passed away, but we knew it could be over 1,000. I mean, the whole island knew this. They weren't letting anybody in. No search. We heard search and rescue was only 30 individuals for the whole entire town for the last 4 days, to the point where citizens and construction workers, like county workers, those were the only people who had approval to get into Lahaina. They are going and picking up bodies of friends and family and loved ones because no one is there to do it. There's no army, there's no Navy, no FEMA, no one is here. And they are making people pull bodies out of the water, bodies off of the street. They have been putting them in flatbeds, trying to give these people dignity because the government is letting them rot on the street. And I know for certain that this is domestic terrorism, because there's never been another natural disaster where the government just leaves victims all over the place for citizens to pick up. It's got to be something more malice. I feel it in every part of my soul.
Well, we can before we get into the possibilities, a lot of theories flying around and reasons, intent, why these theories might be taking place. But I do want to point out, I was grabbing this video from Instagram that somebody recently shared. It's almost done downloading, but it's another firsthand account of things that they saw themselves and that their mother, the same kind of thing, seeing immediately that people were bodies everywhere. Women with babies in their arms running and really terrifying, sad things. So one, just your opinion, why? Well, I guess it's kind of the same question. So what do you think it is that they're not, when you say they're trying to stop people from seeing this and then and stating that this is a terrorist attack? So give me some, flesh that out. Why are those your thoughts? Why do you think that's what happened? And why do you think they're trying to keep people from seeing it? What do you think is there?
I think it's a massive cover up for one, the tourism industry. They're still letting in tourists, and that's sickening to me. They closed us down immediately for COVID, but not a, disaster. So I think that they wanted to keep the fear level low, that it wasn't as bad as what, come to Maui and spend your money and go on vacation. It's fine. Don't worry about that. But I feel like the town of Lahaina was such a historic, powerful, energetic place. I mean, this is where all the Royal Hawaiians lived. This is, people say, Hawaii and Maui in general is the heart chakra of the planet. And there's a lot of energy here. And all of those buildings were over 200 years old. And, we've seen in history where the old is destroyed and put in with the new modern design, or history is erased, and it seems like we in Lahaina we had only just local business owners. There was no corporations. There was no big money there, besides the fact that the property values were extreme, and it was these families holding on to these properties and not giving
Right.
into the government, not selling out. And that's what Lahaina was. It wasn't mega resorts. It was all small community business owners. And they knew that they had to destroy everything if they wanted to be able to come and get that land. And, what I feel is going to happen is that FEMA, as they do, they're going to want to come in and declare it uninhabitable. The developers are going to come in to clean up. And what do we already see? Jeff Bezos, $100 million for, rebuild.
Yeah.
Oprah donated pillows, right. But whatever. She's going to be up next.
And they're the ones that already own 100 million, like 100, right. An obscene amount of acreage in a place where they should, yeah, go ahead.
It feels like a land grab. We have Josh Green yesterday on camera. We're looking for ways that the state can take this land. I mean, he's saying the quiet part out loud. Mm-hmm. And they knew that by destroying this infrastructure and people's jobs and their livelihoods, and destroying the overall complete morale of the town by this devastation and horror, that's how they could get in and build their 15-minute smart city. Josh Green is holding conferences just 3 weeks ago in the UN, saying that Hawaii is leading the way for the smart city, that we're going to be the first state in the country to go all renewable resources and energy. And yeah, here he is, World Economic Forum. So, and then if you look back, it gets a little, more horrifying. In January, they're signing deals to build billion-dollar condominiums. So, we just know that we can follow the money and, figure out, why this would happen to such a hub in the whole world.
Yeah, it's obviously important to note that this is speculation, right? What they are trying to accomplish, but these things shouldn't be dismissed. Ultimately, that this possible. I mean, there's actually a video I played yesterday. I think it's good that one, I didn't know that apparently Lahaina is the original kind of capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii prior to the U.S. occupation, which is pretty interesting. And then in this video, he goes into the same point, which a lot of people are pointing out, that the moneyed interests for a long time of trying to unroot them from this location. And, whether that's why this happened or not, it's very clear to point out that they're a lot of ways happy that these people are no longer there. So let's watch this video.
Yeah.
Due to fire, flood, monster, emergency services. But I need you guys to hear me out. You don't see what's going on. I feel something is bigger. I've been on Maui the last 9 years, and I know the geographical location and how everything works. There was no fucking way that a hurricane missed Big Island, went to Maui, and didn't flood them, didn't give them, crazy, other things, but it caused fires. It caused fires in not only on Maui, but it caused fires in the most precious parts of real estate in Maui. Lahaina Front Street is worth billions. The Hawaiians that have been holding out and the Kanaka have been holding out for years, not wanting to sell their property in Lahaina due to these big $1 million companies. It is not a coincidence, I don't believe, how in the most precious parts of Maui, Kula, Lahaina, and Kihei, that the locals that are standing strong and do not want to give up Oprah Winfrey's fucking view up in Kula that the Hawaiians are holding out on, that the fire was going to, the Hawaiians and the Kanaka that was holding right there on Front Street, homes.
Yeah. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Kate.
I want to play this other video real quick before we go to the fire part of this, because I don't want to forget, but just very quickly showing you the woman telling you what she saw. And again, it's heartbreaking because she kind of gets sad at the end.
Hey guys, I just talked to a tourist who came from the west side. He said that they fled Monday night. They've been sleeping at Baldwin High School for the past couple nights, and he said that when they left that there was bodies everywhere. That's not a lie. That's not a rumor being spread on the internet. There are bodies everywhere. He said that there were moms carrying their babies in their arms.
It's just sad. But, so obviously this is still second information, right? But I mean, it is endless. You can find people who were there saying like they witnessed that with their own eyes, and yet that's just not being represented in the media, which is really, really unnerving, Yeah. So unless you have any comments on these videos, do you want to comment on what he said first, and then we can go to the fires?
Oh, I'm just sick over it because, it feels like 9/11 just happened in my backyard, and no one like fucking cares, to be honest. And I am just grateful that, I have my health and my family is safe and my home is safe. But for so many others, it's not the case. And, I mentioned it earlier that the way that we give these people dignity and the ancestors dignity and the Aina is by standing up in this moment and saying, we have to stop this right now. And it's like, I know that it feels too new to say that, and people are grieving, and I'm grieving too. And it's when I see, people I know with these accounts of pulling babies out of burned car seats, I'm horrified because I'm a mom too. But, like at the same time, we have to say what happened, or it's going to happen again, and they're going to take the land at the same time. And, Hawaii is an annexed nation. The history of Hawaii has such brutal roots of being stolen and pillaged by the military. And it's happening again. And it's going to happen again. They want to take the land.
And not to make it any more harsh, but I think it never stopped, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the point, is that it just never, and that's why I say the same thing from my experience and others that have lived there, that if you talk to most local Hawaiians, they don't believe they're part of the United States. They're Hawaii, it's just it's colonialism. It's everywhere,
It is.
And this could be part of the same thing, and so here's a video that shows some really hard to explain fire placements. And I'm not the one that's usually going to, there's always oddities. I made this point yesterday. I've spoken, like going from the California fire discussion, and more than one, in fact. I did a lot of research with fire chiefs and speaking to them directly, and they'll be the first ones to tell you there are things that they personally think you can't explain. Like even seeing things that they think like even arguing direct energy weapon conversations. But at the same time, having a lot of conversation with them, they'll be the first to tell you that there's very, very strange things that you wouldn't think you could explain, that you find yourself after a fire, random tree left or a weird building left in the middle of a fire, whether it's moisture or winds, or these things are possible. So it's always important to remember. But that being said, this video I find really interesting. And then we can talk about the possibilities of the theories and directed energy weapons and different conversation people are having. So let me know what you think about this.
We're done. Yeah, we're done. Careful right here. There's the real
podcast on the water that are on fire, which, I guess that could happen with winds and fire, but it is odd, right? But this is the part that I think stands out. Stephen Kerchak just commented about this. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just the perfect circle of fire.
Yes, which is coming up right here, which is, that, this is what I point out with anything. Like, nature does not work in perfect lines or perfect circles, or it's not perfect circle, but it is very strange. So this is literally around Lahaina, as I understand it, correct?
It's correct.
It's pretty hard to explain. So, in general, I think that's pretty interesting. Now, I'm always going to be the one that will put out, anything is possible. Who knows what might have caused it or what could have been there? There's probably an explanation, but that which is also a hypothetical, right? So it's just as hypothetical and conspiracy as saying maybe it could have been something deliberate. Both are completely actually, before we get into this, I thought it was hilarious. One of these guys' videos that went pretty viral recently, kind of just giving like a very balanced breakdown. He makes this great point where they're coming out going, we don't know, right? We don't know what started this. We don't know yet. We don't have all the facts. But then somebody comes up and goes, it was a directed energy weapon. And they go, fact check. No, it wasn't. And it's like,
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you just told us you don't know and you don't have the facts, but you're willing to say you know it's not something. It just shows narrative control like COVID-19. I think that's a great point.
Right. And, you know, when I look at this picture of the fire, so, you know, at the bottom, I do understand the bottom ring because that's just where it hits the water line.
Right.
But the one that's the perfect encapsulating C circle, it's just not normal.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as far as the boats catching fire on the water, what I'm hearing, I do maybe consider that I could see how this is possible with the ash was actually so heavy that it created a layer on top of the water. And then it was burning on top of the water because it was sitting on ash.
Or it could have just fallen on top of the boats. That would make sense too.
Falling on the boats. Yeah. People said it was like about briquettes. You know, if you could imagine charcoal being thrown at you, that's what it, because it was 80-mile-an-hour winds throwing the embers like briquettes. So I do see how the boats burned. And then especially if one burned with the gasoline, they're all going.
But so go ahead.
Oh, just the picture is just very indicative.
But again, my big point here is, especially what I wanted to do yesterday, and this is where I find it to get, as I was even saying on my show, is I wasn't, you know, I as always, I'm very skeptical. And again, as I said earlier, since I started seeing so much misinformation early, which goes kind of both ways for me. At the same time, I'm like, maybe they're dumping this in the conversation so people don't look at it, or, you know, but so it increased my skepticism. And so I was going through this story mostly because my brother was really interested in it. And I know people in both Maui and in Oahu. And so I'm like, okay, you know, I want to know what's going on, find the truth of it. And that's when I kind of stumbled onto something I thought was pretty incredible. And this gets into, like, I find this being important, separate from this entire conversation. But then when we realize that there are valid concerns, or even just because we shouldn't be afraid to ask anything of whether or not this could have been something, whether direct energy weapon or anything else for that matter, whether, you know, activists lighting fires to justify climate change, or who knows where you want to make this go, because that's also something which we didn't even mention, the clumsy nature with which seemingly all the corporate media are saying climate change when there's like no indication. You know, it's just, that's just how it works today. They can assume into whatever the direction they want, and that's not conspiracy theory, right? But getting into the idea of directed energy weapons. Now, I thought this was really interesting when I found out that the Air Force has what the AFRL stands for, Air Force Research Laboratory. And they have a laboratory which is actually called the Directed Energy Directorate and actually, if you would like to tell me go ahead and say the name so I don't mispronounce it, because I know I tend to do that.
It's on Haleakala.
And that is the mountain range right here, correct?
Correct. Yep,
okay.
Right at the tippy top.
There's an observatory pretty much right where the Maui name is right there. Now that is the observatory. Now, what I came to find out, which is very interesting, is here, if you read into and here's the actual page for this, that when you outwardly, it's mostly, and you can see there's Maui right there. Outwardly, it's you know, observatory and space surveillance and so on. But you'll quickly find, here's an interesting post actually specifically about Kihei, which they just mentioned, right? That's one of the locations where in 2018 asking, well, would it be a target for nuclear war? And the reason they ultimately say yes is specifically because of this, both the DoD Supercomputing Resource Center, which is also in this area, but is more so over
about that.
Yeah, so Kihei is right over here, correct, near these fires?
Yep.
Just south of that is where this supercomputing location is. And that's
conveniently, that's exactly where Jeff Bezos lives.
Right, exactly. It's literally I believe he's involved with this.
Probably at his house. It's probably at his house.
Quite frankly, I believe he's, you know, part of what we're talking about here. But so the idea is that there's two main locations. All of this is with kind of part of this Air Force compound. And then going further, you'll find out Mr. Kelly Hammett, who ran this location, who apparently seems to be potentially retiring, is on the record more than once talking about this. Here's what he says exactly. We delivered the United States Air Force's first ever operational directed energy weapons. That's his direct quote. As part of the Air Force Directed Energy Experimentation Campaign, the Air Force Research Laboratory characterized and deployed 4 directed energy counter unmanned aerial systems to overseas locations, 3 Raytheon high energy laser weapon systems, and the Air Force Research Laboratory tactical high powered operational responder, the Thor system. It says, we built Thor in-house, that's Maui, on the observatory in 18 months, a record-breaking time. As part of these efforts, they secured the Secretary of Defense approval for operational use of all systems. That's wild. When I stumbled into that, I'm like, this is crazy. So ultimately, the Thor system was operational in Maui in this observatory. So going back to this location, remember that we're talking about, then actually, here's the, before I even go to the next article, let's talk about your video. So let's play this, then you can tell me what we're looking at here, okay?
Yeah.
Or maybe go ahead and comment while it's playing.
It's windy, and then there's a flash, and I think that's when a tree's falling on a power line. The power goes out, our generator kicks in, the camera comes back online, and then the forest is on fire.
Okay, so go ahead and explain where this is, and what direction that's looking at.
So this is 1 mile from my house, and this is actually, remember at the when I told you that my chicken coop flew across my yard? This is the exact moment that this camera is showing this flash. So, speculating here, was my chicken coop flown by an explosion? Because if you notice, you look at the camera, it goes, completely flies as well. And I don't believe that's just because the power went out. That's a reverberation. And, I am 1 mile from this location. And so this is where the fires are continually kind of burning still. And Olinda is directly within the line of sight of Haleakala. But I mean, mind you, Haleakala is, 10,000 feet above sea level. That's the observatory? At the observatory. And you can see the whole island from Haleakala. And when you go up there, there is a whole sanctioned, fence that this is a military base, that you're not allowed to cross these points and get near the observatory. I can see it out my window. It's massive. It's an absolutely massive telescope.
This camera is in the direction of that observatory.
This camera is not showing the observatory. This is definitely just pointed at the wood line kind of towards my house, but it's directly below.
That's what I mean. So if hypothetically, if in the background of this shot that had happened, you would see that light. So it's interesting. Going back to this, we'll play it real quick so you can see it
and
again.
Then there's a flash, and I think
it's a blue flash, which again, I'm going to show you a video, which you could argue that.
And actually, there's no power lines in there too. I want to say that
that's important.
Where this gentleman is, he says power lines, but this is the Maui Bird Sanctuary in Lolinda, and there's not just power lines going through the middle of the woods.
So again, we're on where Maui is essentially is where this observatory is. And so we're looking at that. And what's interesting is this is, again, the location that we just went over. That's the location of the Thor system he references, right? So that's on the observatory. So arguably, if we're just kind of going along with what the information is showing, it seems interesting that you see a flash, which my point was going to be that could look similar to a transformer exploding.
Right.
But what you're saying is that there's nothing back there that would look like that. And so that's very interesting that happens. And then the fires start. So my point would be simply that if, we don't have to start guessing. I mean, we should ask questions, but the idea of whether or not a government setting up a new system would test that system is something we've seen throughout history, or, any number of possibilities. So it's not something we should dismiss, right? I just find that really interesting. So here is a couple of videos. Where was it? I've got, unless I didn't.
One interesting point too that I want to say is that on Haleakala, earlier this year, they flew in scientists from all over the world to help replace the lens in the telescope, or at least that's what they say they were replacing, was the lens. And they said it's like a once in every 2 decade project, and they had to fly in experts from everywhere to do this lens replacement. And that was just earlier this year. So I think that's something just to note as well, that they've had high government officials Haleakala recently doing things.
Interesting. I mean, all these things are relevant. Oh, excuse me. This is playing. So here, I thought I downloaded this, but I guess not. Just really quickly for people to see it. And so you're speaking of the lens in what, the telescope of the observatory, right? So that's, yeah, who knows what that actually was. And maybe it was just a lens, but that's interesting. But so the transformers, here are just 5 examples of transformers exploding. And then I'll play a video after that I find very, very interesting.
Whoa.
Hmm. Dang. Well,
I noticed
ultimately,
lots of differences already just
right.
watching a few of these. I mean, I actually have never watched videos of Transformers like us, and now just this is my first time seeing it, and it's orange, and it
can be.
it
can
flares like very long. It's like a sustained, like, you know, like almost looks like it's a firework, you know, burning. You know, I feel like the video in Olinda is just a flash. It almost is more indicative of like lightning, but I can definitely say there was no thunderstorms that evening.
Well, I'm trying to grab a video that I swear I downloaded. I'm getting frustrated because I had these things pulled up in line today, and I'm wondering where they're gone. But there was a video that I think is really important, and if I can't seem to find it while we're talking about it here, it shows what people argued was a direct energy weapon used before. And I'm so frustrated that I can't find this right now. But ultimately, it shows very similar. The light looks just like you were showing in your video. And but what's really strange is the way that it jumps and moves around. I'll try to find it as we're finishing here. Ultimately, if I can, I'll include it. But what's interesting to me is that we know that direct energy weapons are real. That's what's crazy, is that even that is just pushed back by some people. But my last show, I mean, it's Fox News talks about using this. Lockheed Martin has their own videos about it. Don Rumsfeld's on the record talking about it 30 years ago. It's ridiculous, right? So that gets dismissed. And it doesn't mean that these things can't be transformers, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is how it would look. We know, as based on their own documentation and the reports, that it wouldn't, they claim you can't see it. It's not a laser like you would expect. So it would look just like that if it was. Then you overlap that with the idea that you've got it in that exact location, what they're again telling us. And I do actually want to go to that last page here to show you what else he says. And this, for people that might think that this is, misreported, this is from the man's own website. Dr. Kelly Hammett, SES, and he says his 20-year active duty career spanned a variety of missions, mainly focused on directed energy weapon systems. So it's funny that they act like that's not what happens there, even though he seems to publicly say that everywhere he goes about this. And a $7 billion airborne laser program, directed energy directorate, which is the location, specifically Maui space surveillance system. So it's almost hard for me to wrap my mind around how that's so transparent. you know,
Right.
almost to wonder whether that we're supposed to look at this. You know, I mean, how do you take all that? How do you piece this in with what you see happening, other than the obvious that it was a weapon that they used?
You know, I feel like, you know, this is kind of those predictive programming moments where, you know, they reveal and they make it very transparent from the beginning, so people don't look at the blatantly obvious, which is, you know, that this could be something malicious. And, you know, it kind of ties back to, you know, why Unjected exists, which is, you know, the government is capable of doing unspeakable things on our population. And this is not the first crime against humanity. And, you know, the government has been adequately the biggest domestic terrorist, probably of all time. And, you know, I feel, you know, and even the, you know, I've seen now Mountain Dew, Maui Dew blast, you know, there's these little things that are starting to like come out. And it's like, you know, if we're going to look at the synchronicities, there's probably too many to just be coincidence. And, you know, it's the same thing that we've seen with the, you know, the vaccines and with COVID and with the lockdowns, or, you know, with 9/11. I mean, this has been, you know, this is an old story, unfortunately. And I think that, you know, as truth seekers and as people that, you know, want to see the world continue, you know, just, you know, this is, I think, another part of them ushering in smart cities. And they want to make Hawaii an example for the rest of the country. And that's not, you know, that's going to affect all of us one day. And so I just hope that we can really shine light on this, that it's not, most likely not a natural disaster. If you look at the public's opinion here on Maui, and in other parts of the Hawaiian Islands, you know, I have friends in Kauai or Big Island or Oahu, we collectively do not believe that this was a natural disaster. The people do not believe that. And if the media says that, that is a lie and it is not true. There's, of course, there's a small handful. Absolutely. But collectively, everyone I've spoken to believes that this was an attack. I mean, cashiers at the grocery store yesterday, oh, we were attacked. And so I just want that to stay as the tone and resonate. And I hope that people don't, you know, be fearful. You know, I am obviously not a native Hawaiian, and people can be really angry at me for, you know, being a haole and speaking up about things maybe that aren't in my place. But I love Hawaii, and, you know, my children are Kama'aina. They were born here, and I will fight for this place to the day I die. And I love it here. And I'm willing to stand up and say that that was a absolute domestic terrorist attack. And, you know, and I'm just a white girl on a little island. And I hope that other Hawaiians come out and say that too. And I hope that all the locals speak up. And I hope that we all collectively come together and say, this isn't what happened. And then, you know, we'll be able to effectively, you know, protect what is left of the Aina, because it needs protecting right now.
You know, and whether or not, and I, by the way, did find this video, thank God, so we can play this to finish, but, but, you know, it's whether or not people think that this was deliberate action, or, you know, however you see this, the real thing, the larger point is that we can see a larger effort to do all the things we're talking about in regard to moving people out of locations that are desired, or 15-minute cities, or the, you know, technocratic shift in everything we're doing, or, I mean, any number of things we could talk about. It is a real open, not, it's, you know, open secret, if you will, where they're actively doing these things. And it's really about the framing of it that gets dismissed. Like, no one's denying that the World Economic Forum and the UN and all these different things are happening. But when we say, oh, this is being used to control you, even though it quite literally is in fact able to control what you do, it's all conspiracy theory. You know, it's a block for some people. So all we're doing here with this in general is just asking people to ask questions and realize that these people, the powers that wish they were, ultimately, I like that new term. Yeah, it historically have proven themselves to be the kind of people capable, and I mean, in a general sense, is the body of the kind of government we're talking about, to experiment on people. I think we just literally saw that with COVID-19, but even before that, it's recorded. So we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss these things. So I appreciate you sharing all this stuff, because I know it's not easy to put yourself out there and, you know, have the courage to say what you think. Here is, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just thank you for giving me the opportunity. You know, I learned to stand up for the truth a long time ago, and that's all we have. So we got to keep doing
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so this is a good place to end on this. Then you just give me your thoughts on like the overlap. But so you can see this Associated Press put this video out as well. Here, this is the video I'll show you just so we know that this is not some kind of, manipulated video. This one is literally put out by the local channel for WWL. So let's just watch it right here, and you can see the overlap to what we just saw, right? So we saw the example of your video, which I'll quickly play afterwards. So you can see the way it looks. We saw 4 examples of the different transformers exploding. Some look a little bit blue, but it can be a variation. This, to me, even though they do say this is an electrical explosion, the way it's reported, I don't know how we can explain the way this looks, the way that it moves. It's very strange. So watch for yourself.
That's crazy.
Wow.
It's pretty weird. I mean, so at the end, I think it's these parts right about here that I think are the most strange. Like,
Right.
obviously, you could make the argument that these are all transformers, right? But it's weird that it keeps, like, I would argue that this, when that kind of thing happens, it's not something that repeatedly happens in the same location. Like, it
Right.
comes back to the same location, but it's the way that it moves right here, like, right from, like, in ways that, as far as I can tell, there aren't even power lines. It moves between
Right.
these areas. So, I'm not going to say I'm an expert on that, but I quite frankly find that really hard to wrap my mind around. And, comparing that to your video,
Yeah.
which we can watch. Go ahead if you have any comments.
Oh, I agree with what you said. It's kind of hopping around, and it's kind of strange that it doesn't blow out the power immediately everywhere. Did you notice that?
Right, exactly.
Some
Which is
stuff
usually what you
stays
expect.
on, some stuff's off.
Mhm.
It's weird. It's like not consistent.
It is, yeah. And you would expect this to, lose, like, I mean, even like you said, the shell sign, or even the fact that some of the locations that just blew up are
Right.
still even on, the lights, the street lights, or, I don't know. It's very strange. I think it's clear that people could argue that that is Transformers. But then again,
Mhm.
here's what you sent.
It's windy, and then there's a flash, and I think
Right.
that's when a tree's
Blue
falling on a
flag.
power line. The power goes out, or generator kicks.
And then, and then the fire in the tree. So I don't know. I mean, I find that really hard not to see as something that is at the very least possible, right?
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting to me. So any final thoughts on that in general? And, and then we'll kind of leave on, where shout out your work and everything else.
Oh, you're sweet. I'm just blown away, to be honest. I'm just speechless with everything that just keeps being revealed. And just, when I see, that video, the first time I saw it was just yesterday. So, I'm sure that it's only going to be the evidence is going to be excuse me, I can't talk. It's going to keep revealing itself. And, I'm sure a lot of the video evidence in Lahaina was destroyed, but I I really look forward to seeing, kind of what starts churning and seeing
Yeah.
if we can get anything else out of there too.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll include this, because even though my show was an hour long, it tends to be hard for people to pluck out the important parts of it. So I put this out as well for just people to see, the actual highlighted from his page, the different points and the locations, and we delivered the first ever operational directed energy weapon. Like, it's just amazing, like that's not already seeded throughout the entire conversation. But I'm sure somebody big enough will pick it up and it will get out there. This needs to be discussed. Theorized. What is this and is it related? Even if it's not, though, that's the point I was saying. It's still pretty interesting, that's something that is kind of regarded as not real. And then the locations of where they're building and Kihei and where that location is directly located next to those fires. And we can see the examples of I don't know. I mean, I'm not one to, unless we can prove it, we have to leave it at the points we don't know. But all of this stuff, I think, is wildly, it necessitates more investigation. So thank you for having the courage to talk about it and continuing to research. Let us know if you find anything. We would love to hear first. And before we go, anything else you want to leave us with? Thoughts on this upcoming work? Shout out Unjected and everything else.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, in my when I'm unfortunately not discussing tragedy, the happier mission that I have is, of course, unjected.com. If you're a person who is medical autonomous, who didn't, take the last experimental, experiment that we saw, head on over for dating, friendships, community. We even have blood donors, fertility listings as well. And then, I just really quickly, since last time I talked to you, Ryan, one thing that we started doing with Unjected is we're verifying members. So now we actually have all of our members attest by affidavit to their vaccination status. So we're just kind of going an extra level to give people a little bit security when they're looking for partners or friends. But
now, is somebody able to sign up even if they don't do that? Is it just like they get a label, or you're not allowed to sign up unless it says
so? I know on the last version of the website we still had the ability, but right now it's still kind of in development. So we're working on the unverified Unjected as kind of its own private carousel, just to make sure that the integrity for the people who are verified Unjected get to have their place too. But yeah, it'll all be in the works coming up soon.
I'm glad, because I love what you guys are doing. I think it's fantastic. And I just think it's really important for the same things we were fighting for, to get, like, if they want to sign up for something that's specifically about being unvaccinated, it makes sense to be like, yes, because the whole point is people wanting to find mates or donors that are verified as unvaccinated, but at the same time, they don't want to have to admit it. We all stood on that ground before, so I love it. Just give them I'm not divulging who I am, but I love it. I'm really glad you guys are still fighting. I'm glad you teamed up with Dr. McCullough and Wellness Group. So keep up the great work. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to sign up as soon as I can. So let me know.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thanks for helping get the word out about our little Maui, and just lots of prayers to our island.
Absolutely. And we'll follow up as well. And thank you for being here. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.